Computer. Susie,
Rob,
how much have you thought about extinction and de-extinction?
do you know, I've thought a little bit about it because I did a different podcast, well, a radio show about it actually, and I had to uh, read a lot about it because actually I didn't know anything at all about it. So I had to do quite a lot of reading.
So you've
And
already
as you
done your
know,
homework here.
well, I've done my homework. It was a while ago, but I did my homework. But as you know, the way that we do our homework, like all good scientists, is mainly to read the Wikipedia pages about it. How much have you thought about the extinction, Rob? Do you think you could bring an extinct animal back from the dead?
Probably not, but if you gave me 10 billion pounds, I might give you a fat, fluffy mouse and a big white dog. So, Susie, how have you been since we last spoke? What have you been up to?
I've been well, thank you. I'm giving a talk today. I noticed that you and I are wearing the same shirt as also.
Oh, well, that's
That's
very well
unusual.
coordinated. What are you talking
Yeah.
about today?
I'm talking about stegosaurs at the
Oh,
University
of
of
course,
Oxford
of
today.
course, of course, it's Stegosaurus. Well, I've been
Mm.
mostly busy marking. It's marking time, which I guess you
Oh,
don't have to worry about so much.
no, you have my sympathies.
No.
I used to. It was awful. So what's today's paper about, Rob?
Well, all about dire wolves.
So what's so bad about them then?
Oh no. Oh
Ah,
no.
okay. I
Okay.
just spent all morning chuckling about why they were called dire wolves.
Okay. But let's move on and think about today's paper then, I guess. But let's first of all by talking about dire wolves and the science or perhaps pseudoscience of de-extinction. So Susie, you said you've already had a little bit of a think about de-extinction. How would you describe de-extinction?
Um, I think the conclusion that I have come to, having read a little bit about it, is that it is not possible, pointless, and potentially takes money away from genuine conservation efforts. So overall, not that positively.
Big spoiler alert there.
How do you
Well,
feel
okay.
about it?
I think this paper in particular is a good example of why I might end up coming to the same conclusion you. But maybe we should explore why that might be the case because
Mm,
there's been a lot of excitement and heat about this situation. So I guess the basic principle is that we'll talk about is that you need to bring those things back to life. You need ancient DNA. So there's been big strides in ancient DNA technology, right? So most of the time when we think about fossils, we don't get any DNA or anything like that because DNA is a very fragile biomolecule, it's gone. But there's been big strides in our ability to sequence that information, which leaves open the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could use that DNA in order to take an organism that is no longer present or extinct and use it to create something again. That's the basic principle. So there's been a lot of hype about this, variously with mammoths. One of the big players in this is Colossal Biosciences, which is the subject of that we're going to be focusing on a bit today. So this is led by Beth Shapiro. She's this is an interesting person because she had a very big high profile career before she got involved in this. She's on sabbatical. I was aware of her papers for a while. She's published all sorts of stuff on ancient DNA and a big proper bona fide scientist and has taken a 3 year sabbatical in order to become the lead of this, maybe CEO. I mean, that might be a bit more of an ambitious sabbatical than I might manage. If you were to, what would you a 3 year CEO of a business? What are you going to be doing?
well, if I was going to take a 3 year sabbatical, I think I'd take a 3 year sabbatical and go lie probably face down on a beach somewhere, not become a CEO of a major international biosciences company. I don't know.
I think we have different expectations, perhaps. I'm more. I think my vibe is more with yours than that one. So let's focus particularly on dire wolves in this instance, because that's what this particular paper is about. We'll get to the particular paper, but there was a bit of a preamble to the paper because there was this big press excitement and extravaganza specifically about dire wolves. So, how much did you know about dire wolves before any of this, Susie? Had you come across them before?
I mean, I think probably as much as most people in that weren't they in Game of Thrones?
They were in Game of Thrones,
I
and
think that was
unfortunately,
it.
we are going to have to talk about Game of Thrones a little bit here. I mean, I say unfortunately. I mean, I was a fan of
Why
the
not?
books,
Yeah.
but they've set it up like this, right? It's not like we're being using some bizarre, rigid pop culture reference here. They've specifically framed it around that. So,
Yeah.
but let's start with the actual science first. So, they're an extinct group of canids or dogs that were native to the Americas, using the late Pleistocene to early Holocene. So, we're talking about North America. There were these from about 125,000 years ago, and they went extinct about 10,000 years ago.
So
So,
can I just interject here, Rob? Because
yes, go
this
ahead.
this
Yeah.
is this is uh called the fossil files.
Yes.
Now, I'm not, I mean, I've got underwear older than these fossils. Like, these aren't fossils. They only died
That,
the other
and
day.
then, okay, for you and I, they're topsoil, right? But they are actual bona fide fossils. Have you visited La Brea Tar Pits in Los
I
Angeles?
have. What an amazing
Yeah.
place that is.
I really love my visit. I went there on holiday with in my 20s with some friends, and they went to Disneyland, and I said, I'm dipping out. I'm going to the La Brea Tar Pits on my own, and it was a great day out. I
It
mean,
was. Yeah.
there was no Mickey, but they've got a whole wall full of direwolf skull fossils. So there's a really rich fossil record of these critters, loads of them, loads of them. So they're a distinct species. I guess we should talk about what makes a dire wolf a bit different. So they're basically like a wolf in many respects, but they're a bit bigger. And they have morphologically similar to grey wolves, with some exceptions. Dire wolves have larger temporalis muscles than grey wolves, capable of generating bigger bite force. And this was the highlight they wanted to say, they had proportionally long bacula.
Yeah.
So I don't know why that has to
Good
be an
to know.
important claim. So do you want to describe to our audience what a bacula is for those that might not know?
It is a penis bone, Rob.
It is a
So
penis bone.
dire
They have,
wolves had big penises compared to grey wolves. Why this is important is unclear.
I
Did they
don't know.
manage to? Well, we'll come to that.
We'll come to that later on. So
Another
they went
interesting
in,
thing I
yeah,
discovered in this was that there appears to be some sort of close wolf relative called a D hole. I'm not
yes.
sure that's how it's pronounced, but a D
I
hole.
actually, yes, this is this Asiatic canid. I'm imagining it's a dehole rather than a D-hole, but should we go with dehole rather than
Let's
D-hole?
go with the hole.
Okay. Again, we are going. Is this going to be a continual theme that we embarrass ourselves over our lack of awareness and pronunciation of these? Is this becoming a theme? Oh, so one thing I should mention about them is so the topsoil, the 10,000 years ago, the big point that will become relevant later on is why did they go extinct? So we're going to come back to this because that's quite important, right? What happened to them? They were one of the big late Quaternary mass extinctions. So these late Pleistocene Quaternary extinctions is a big deal, right? We spend a lot of time as academics talking about that. What were the causes behind it? Was it climate change, or was it humans that caused the extinction of these things? It's quite a complicated picture. It depends on which continent you look at, but humans have been implicated in the extinction. But either way, a lot of the things went extinct at the same time, which is also going to be relevant. You know, it wasn't just the direwolves, it was, I don't know, bisons, mammoths, a whole bunch of big, sexy things that went. I perhaps shouldn't describe them as sexy, but you know what I mean. Charismatic things might be the more appropriate word. Okay, so maybe we've got into too much detail though. We should maybe talk about what they actually did. About a few months ago, there was this big, massive press release, an enormous article in Time magazine, which had been described as client journalism, but I'm not going to get into that, I guess. Three direwolves were announced to have been created by Colossal Biosciences. Romulus and Remus, about 6 months old, so named after the Roman ones, and then a bit later along, Khaleesi. Now, I want to mention this, one of my PhD students, they got really annoyed that they named it Khaleesi because this is completely contradicting the Game of Thrones lore. So just to, have you watched and consumed Game of Thrones?
I have watched Game of Thrones, but not obviously not to the geeky level of this particular PhD student because I have no idea what the problem is here.
So Khaleesi was the ruler of the dragons. She had nothing to do with the direwolves. The direwolves was the Starks thing. So
Yes,
I
okay,
don't want to spend
yes.
too long talking about this, but the direwolves was the Game of Thrones is a fantasy novel, and in this world, dragons exist, direwolves exist. You know, ancient life is okay, but that's because it's set in the particular world that it's in. Fine. Direwolves also pop up in other popular culture, but in the Game of Thrones universe, which they evoke, is the Starks, and they look like big wolves, basically, which is probably what we think. And there was one white wolf that was Jon Snow the bastard. He had a big, large white wolf. Everyone else had normal ones, but the whole point that he had a big white one was because he was the outsider, the Snow, the bastard, which was part of the plot of the thing. And the color, yeah, the color is relevant because it comes up later on. Anyway, much confusion. What were all these things? Beth Shapiro doubles down, goes on lots of interviews, says these are we have brought back the direwolves from the extinction. What? Headline news, big splash all over the place. Now, after a bit of time, we actually figure out what they actually did. They created 20 edits of 14 genes in the common grey wolf, and then they took those. So they basically took some grey wolf DNA, messed around with 14 genes with 20 tiny edits, presumably using CRISPR. They haven't actually mentioned how they did it. and then put that DNA into an empty dog ovum, and then put that ovum into some large dogs which served as surrogate mothers. Most of the embryos failed to develop, but four pups were born. One died from a ruptured intestine, and then these leaving these three big white dogs with thick hair, which were claimed to be dire wolves. So, What are your immediate thoughts?
Well, what my immediate thought was actually, because obviously I heard about that at the time and I read some articles about it. And then I read the paper yesterday. And the
Yeah,
paper isn't it's not absolutely nothing to do. I mean, actually,
nothing
I'm
to
going to say
do with
right
that.
now,
Yeah.
you know, I only understood about one in every 10 words because it is like hardcore genomics, right? So, and
Which
I
was
am a
the exact thing you
geologist.
said you didn't want us to do, which is what we have now inflicted upon you. Yeah.
But it's nothing about the paper is
Yeah.
nothing about the extinction at all. It's simply
Yeah.
about, what is the relationships between these taxa. So I thought that was quite interesting actually, that, the press release actually doesn't relate to the paper kind of at all. I
So
mean, I
indeed,
guess there's some genetic basis in there, but
yeah, we should commit to the format is that we talk about a different paper each week. So we have to be we can't give up on the format only this early on in the run. So let's talk about the actual paper that came out. So this is a preprint. This came out on April the 11th, uploaded to bioRxiv. From Gregory Gedman and lots of people. Beth Shapiro is the final author and lead author. Side note, Susie, did you notice who was the penultimate or third from last author in the author list?
I was going to ask you about this because it's George R. Martin.
It's George R. Martin is the fourth from last author on the author line.
George R. Did he produce Game of Thrones? Did he write the
He was the
book?
writer of the
He was the
original book, a
writer of the
producer of the
original
TV
books,
program, and
all of those
he's
things.
been associated with Colossal Biosciences. I mean, the fact that he's
Mental.
involved makes it kind of surprising, but also, how did he ever get this paper actually finished? Because he doesn't seem to have finished anything. He's bloody right. Anyway, let's not get into that. I don't want to maybe a
Have you
massive
read,
savage on him.
did you read the competing interest statement? That's quite the thing.
Oh, yes. So, the competing interest is quite a thing because, well, this is going to boil down to conversation about money. Okay, most of the time in paleontology, a competing interest statement is nothing because, what possible, this is your opportunity to declare your interests. Maybe you own a company with some shares in it. Maybe you had some relationship with of the commercial information. In this instance, of course, they have to declare it of which ones are on the advisory board, who's the CEO, who's the founder, because there's a lot of money involved here. And the outcomes of this paper are basically commercially sensitive and have an impact. Well, yeah. But before we get into the money and the science, let's talk a little bit about what was going on in this paper. So, um, they basically sequenced the ancient DNA of some direwolves. Now, to give you some context for this is not the first time this has happened. The biggest paper that they refer to is by Angela Perry in 2021 on in Nature, which is direwolves were the last of an ancient New World canid lineage, where they sequenced some genomes from 5 genomes from some direwolves and did some interesting things with the phylogenies and evolution relationships. These guys have come along and sequenced the same ones. So, I mean, already how much of a difference is making. But the big difference is that the depth and breadth of the coverage. It's massive, right? With an ancient genome, you don't normally get this kind of good quality data. They've got a lot. They've got well, I wrote down some numbers, but it won't really mean a lot. They've got a lot of DNA. Let's say they've got lot more than the first one. Nuclear and I'm not going to go into the methods because it's not my speciality. And it's quite technical and dry. One thing I will say though is that the Perry et al. Paper from 2021, and Perry is an author on this one, they sent the DNA, they did the sequencing work in 5 different labs. They did it in Copenhagen, Adelaide, Oxford, UCLA, Santa Cruz, Arizona State. Now, that's quite common practice with ancient DNA, because, in fact, it was my understanding that you had to do that. Because it's an expectation of contamination. I don't know how much you've come across ancient DNA, but that seems to me like that was the rule that you had to send it to lots of different places.
Yeah, I think I seem to recall reading that was the
Yeah,
case, that to make sure that it's not sort of in lab contamination. If they get the same result
absolutely.
across multiple different labs, then it shows that it must be original.
Yeah, these techniques are so sensitive that if you just get a whiff of something in the if the lab had been sequencing some ostriches and then you're trying to analyze some DNA from something older, then you might end up with ostrich things scattered all over it. Or human DNA, if you're working on something like Neanderthals, you might end up figuring out that the Neanderthal that you've been trying to sequence is actually Jeff from accounts because he came in with a cold that day and sneezed and everything. You've got to be super, super careful that you sequence it in multiple labs so that you can compare the results and look at it. Now, side note, these guys in this most recent paper, all the sequencing took place in Santa Cruz. So
Okay.
just to let people know, Susie's face was the very telling expression there, which we couldn't see. Yeah, which is one of suspicion. Now, I don't know how much to make of that because but that's all I'm going to say about the methods. They did it in just one lab. But they've sequenced loads and loads and loads, numbers, 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 lots of nuclear genes assembled. They did a reference genome to assemble it in comparison to other canids. Let's look ahead at what they actually found out then, rather than what they actually did. They used this to construct a phylogeny. Lovely. We love a phylogeny. This is the first time we talked about phylogeny, and I'm normally always insisting on talking about phylogenies. And they found a dire wolf. They placed it in an evolutionary tree, and it is in between a lot of the dogs that we're familiar with, as in wolves, coyotes, African wild dogs, jackals, and then dire wolves, and then other things like the Andean fox. This is fairly similar to the phylogeny from before. It's not massive change in the sense that we've got jackals, dogs, deholes,
The holes.
deholes. Uh, but that was, I guess, not the main thing of what they're trying to figure out. What they wanted to know about was admixture. So, was there breeding and gene flow between populations? Yes, there was. They found that the direwolf wasn't interbreeding there wasn't any gene flow from coyotes and gray wolves, which is the ones that live in North America, but there was things from the maned wolf, which is this weird thing that lives in South America. I don't know if you've seen it. It's got these really long, thin legs, and it's got a mane, and it's very ginger. It's an odd thing. It's alive today. And then the whole. So there has been some interbreeding, which is different from other previous results. But the only bit that's really relevant to the specific de-extinction thing is they identified some genes that were under positive selection. So what they've done is they've focused down with this nuclear genome and said which of these genes are under positive, which ones make up a direwolf more than other genes. And they've identified some that are related to body size mostly. And I think that's where the relationship to the whole de-extinction thing comes from, is that they were using those identified genes to tweak them and end up with what they got. So that was the paper. How was you described it earlier as dry, did you?
Incomprehensible, I think I described it as earlier,
Incomprehensible,
but
yes.
I'm a geologist, so papers on hardcore genomics are difficult for me. Didn't understand the methods, but I had not um, picked up actually that it wasn't even that new. And I did
Mm,
wonder, that this has been submitted to bioRxiv, so it's a preprint,
mm,
it's not
mm,
a published paper. Um, I did wonder whether, and this has been out for a while now, I did wonder whether it had been submitted anywhere and whether they ever
mm,
had intended to submit it
mm.
anywhere. But it seems like the novelty value may be fairly low from what you're saying.
Uh, a lot of it replicates what Perry et al. Already did. Apart from this thing of they've identified the genes and the admixture. But maybe we should explain to people a bit about what a preprint is, because not everyone will be aware. Susie, can you describe a preprint?
So a preprint is you write a paper, and once you're kind of finished with your paper, you can upload it onto one of these servers. And
Yeah.
this paper isn't published in a way that a scientific paper is, because one of the key aspects of scientific publication is peer review. So a
Mhm.
paper has to go through peer review. And normally we would submit a paper to a journal, it would go through peer review, we would get comments back. We would then make changes to the paper in response to those comments, and which I have to say, people complain about peer review, but I have never had a paper that has been worse after peer review.
Yeah. Yeah.
Peer review improves papers. It makes your paper better. It points out to you references you might have missed, and places you haven't explained things very well, and allows you to really, improve your paper. And
Mm,
sometimes, of course, it also picks up major methodological or ethical problems with
yeah.
work as well. And then, of course, once it's gone through peer review and everyone's happy, it can then be published. The problem is that you can also end up though with things in the literature, if you like, or this sort of grey literature of preprints that are not peer reviewed. Um, and for somebody who's not a scientist or not an academic, it can be unclear that they have a different status from a published paper.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think the important thing is it's meant to sort of speed up and science and make it more transparent and collaborative. But we have to remember that that science hasn't actually yet been peer reviewed. So that in this case, we're looking at something that is a sort of advanced copy. So with that in mind, let's try and relate it back to the original press of what they said. So Beth Shapiro and the team of Colossal Biosciences came out and said, this is a dire wolf. We have brought an organism back from extinction. Like that was the way it was framed very, very clearly by both their interviews and their press releases and the journalism that was directly involved with them. Now, I'm interested in that because, she doubled down. Really, in effect, we haven't got a direwolf. We're not even close to a direwolf. No direwolf DNA has gone into these three critters. What we've got is a genetically engineered wolf.
Yeah.
Okay, where we have tinkered with 20, 14 genes in a wolf, and we've made it a bit bigger, white, and potentially some other things. Now,
has it got a longer penis?
No one, as far as I'm aware, no one's measured the penis length of this thing yet. But that's, I know that sounds ridiculous, but is there actually an interesting question? Because have they changed that gene? Equally, that implies that you can just turn off a gene for what these things. Genes are rarely that specific, right? That you could have one gene that does one thing. It's often a massive complex mix. So I guess identifying those 20 genes that they think were under selection is probably quite important. But they also, if you change one gene, it can have a knock-on effect somewhere else. So you need to. It sounds like they have tried to pick genes carefully that won't mess everything up. But this isn't how evolution works. This is getting me all excited again. This isn't how evolution works, right? Evolution will create something where all the genes are working together, or often working together, and you end up with an end result, not a situation where you've just created something. I mean, I normally get a bit upset when people describe Frankenstein science or mad scientists, because that's often not what's going on in the case. In this case, you could possibly say this is by design. This thing has been designed. It's not a natural creation. So maybe we should talk about what's going on here with these Colossal Biosciences. So they're an outfit. This is a commercial outfit that have created this thing. These are animals that are never going to be re-released. They're going to live in a protected ecological reserve that's kept secret. They've been hand reared, and that's the situation we're in. They're being kept in a secret location. Do you know how much Colossal Biosciences has been valued at?
Tell me, Rob.
Tell me, $10.2 billion.
What the?
$10.2 billion.
Why? What value are they adding?
Well, that's interesting, but they have some spin-offs where they've been looking at plastic degradation by enzymes and AI computer platforms for drug development. But really, it seems to me that they're also looking at mammoths as well. That's where the fat, fluffy mouse comes in, because there was a press release a while ago about we've created a big, fat, fluffy mouse. What they've done is they've tinkered with some genes to turn on things that would make it more like a mammoth, which again is what is that? That's nowhere near. Oh, never mind. That's not. I'm going to get worked up again. So I'm reminded of Elizabeth Holmes a little bit with this whole thing, and the snake oil of Elizabeth Holmes. Did you ever come across that? I forgot what her company was called. There's one with the blood testing thing. Yeah, where it was. I do wonder about how much these Silicon Valley guys are actually scientifically literate. They're being sold a promise, and it's not possibly going to be happening.
But I mean, if I was a geneticist
Yes.
and was offered a job to work in a lab for this company, Colossal Biosciences, I mean, it would probably be fantastic, right? Because
Hmm.
what you could get to do probably is some really interesting research, some really interesting genomics research, and ancient DNA work that is really, really, really well funded.
Hmm.
So, from the perspective of the scientists who are, in the lab every day doing this work, it's probably a really great opportunity for them to get, to do what they're
Hmm.
really passionate about and learn about, do
Hmm.
this stuff, the stuff that this paper actually talks about, which is,
Hmm.
examining ancient DNA and the phylogenetic relationships of extinct organisms, which, fundamentally is what you and I do, Rob. But
Yes.
they are just able to do it using genomics instead. I think what I don't understand is what this company, what is the point? What is, and this is the crux, what is the point in trying to bring back something that is extinct?
Okay. Well, I
And,
have an
and
answer
I
to
mean,
you
they're
there.
not even doing it, are they? So that's the other thing. I mean, we
Yeah,
have
yeah,
established that
yeah, yeah.
they are not doing it. What? Okay,
Yes.
let's rephrase that. What is the point
Yeah.
in genetically engineering a series of organisms and then pretending to the world that you have brought back an
That
extinct
is an
organism?
excellent question that I think really gets to the crux of this whole, I was going to say a bad word, this whole situation. Right. So a quote here from Beth Shapiro that went along with all this climate journalism. Quote from Beth Shapiro. If we want a future that is both bionumerous and filled with people, we should be giving ourselves the opportunity to see what our big brains can do to reverse some of the bad things we've done to the world already. So that's implying that some of the motivation is that they're eco warriors trying to save the world, right? So they're saying that you've got lots of people in the world, we've killed things. This is where the question of who is responsible for the extinction of the direwolf is quite key, right? Was it human ancestors? Although how much responsible we are for those 10,000 years ago, I don't know. This leads to all sorts of interesting questions about colonialism and human responsibility that is really far beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But the idea is that, they want to save the planet by bringing back things. And there's much excitement about that. And they're trying to do this for mammals as well. Now, there is a really big problem here, which is what you were hitting upon. Firstly, they're nowhere near reintroducing these things to the actual wild, right? That's not going to happen because you couldn't, right? These are organisms that have been reared in a lab. They're not natural. They're not dire wolves. They are social animals that have been reared without any mother from the same species, or same species. I'm falling into the trap of the PR. They haven't been raised with a mother with the same DNA. So and they live in groups, right? There's a big social component of this. They haven't been exposed to the same parasites. And what are they going to eat? Right? These the guys went extinct at the same time as well. Bison are still going, but let's say bison they've suffered big numbers collapse. Mammoths, right? Big things they were eating around at the time, they're gone. So if we were to re-release these into the North American wilderness, I'm pretty sure people are going to be losing their mind at the fact that there's now these large carnivorous things, bigger than wolves, that are already a politically sensitive thing. But they're being described as direwolves and de-extinction. Now, let's talk about some of the real world implications of this. The problem is that not only are they not doing what they said they were doing, which is saving these animals and reintroducing them, they're actually making it harder for people that might actually be doing that proper serious work. Let's talk about actual conservation work, like making a nature reserve, reintroducing animals, protecting the communities that still exist. The thing that's most chilling for me from this story was that they doubled down on the PR, said it was de-extinction, and then this tweet from Doug Bergman, the Secretary of the Interior. Have you come across Doug Bergman before? No,
No.
I encourage you to look up a picture of him. He looks like some sort of cartoon of what you might imagine an American politician would look like. He's got like these big locks of white hair and this massive grin and this sort of car salesman face. He was the former governor of Nevada, so he's now the Secretary of the Interior in Trump's cabinet, and so he's in charge of national parks, fisheries, Native American affairs, that sort of thing. And he says, quote, the Department of Interior is excited about the potential of de-extinction technology and how it may serve broader purposes beyond the recovery of lost species, including strengthening biodiversity protection efforts and helping endangered species at risk. The endangered species list has become like the Hotel California. Once a species exists, sorry, I'm distracted by Susie's reaction. Once a species enters, they never leave. In fact, 97% of species that added to the endangered list remain there. Now, Doug is forgetting that maybe they're on that list because they need protection and they haven't been saved. That's why, right? That's why they're not getting off that list. He wants things to be taken off that list. He says, going forward, we must celebrate the removals from the list, not additions. And then further on, blah blah blah. The revival of the direwolf heralds the advent of a thrilling new era of scientific wonder, showcasing how the concept of de-extinction can serve as a bedrock for modern species conservation. Chilling.
It is chilling,
Chilling.
Rob. And so a thing that nobody has talked about, I don't think, particularly with regard to this, is the fact that actually the way that these animals are created are clones. They're clones,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
they're all genetically identical to each other.
Hmm.
Now, when a thing that we know about populations is genetic diversity is really important because
Hmm.
it allows resilience to diseases and to environmental changes and things like that. And that when you have very, very, very small genetic pool, let alone an identical genetic pool,
Hmm.
um, your population is much, much, much more likely to go extinct. And there's kind of a threshold, isn't there, over which
Mm.
your genetic diversity gets so small that you're going to go extinct. So
Yeah.
the thing was that, if they're saying that this is the answer to conservation, they're just cloning stuff. So how
Hmm.
many different individuals are they going to have to clone, and from how many different populations to make a viable genetic population? I mean, at the moment, they couldn't make a direwolf population out of the three individuals that they have, because those individuals are genetically identical, so they're functionally extinct.
Well, they have two males and one female, so they must have used a different genome for the female one, presumes. But again, the point about genetic diversity is important because those three would the only genetic diversity they have is within the genes that they may have got from their grey wolves. So
Yeah,
there's no hope of this ever being a viable population. Not
yeah,
only for I mean, we'd have to imagine a circumstance where we could imagine that we actually had the ability to create the full direwolf genome. Then we'd have all the problem about the social behavior, the immune system, the reintroduction, where they're going to put them. But we're not even anywhere close to that. We're at a situation where we've got three individuals that are genetically tinkered with grey wolves that look a bit weird, and then they would have again, if we did introduce them to the world, they would immediately breed with a grey wolf. Of
yeah,
course,
exactly. And then you
how
just
could
end
they
up with a
not?
grey wolf again. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So there's absolutely because
So
how could you not?
even for conservation, even if we took something that we're really happy that we wiped out, like say a passenger pigeon, right? That
Mhm.
we definitely, we are
Oh yeah,
responsible
that
for
happened
that one.
in historic time
Right.
frames. Yeah.
And we've got ones that we could get DNA from. It's not even ancient
Hmm.
DNA, it's just regular
Hmm.
DNA, right? But you'd still have to produce such a large number of these individuals to be
Hmm.
able to make a viable population of passenger pigeons. I mean, it I just don't think it's viable. It would be much, much more sensible just to take that money and put it into keeping something that is, on the endangered list, getting that off the endangered list.
I completely agree with you. The passenger pigeons is a really interesting example. So this happened in a historic time, right? This was Europeans when they arrived in North America and came across this super abundant species and then just trapped them and killed them. The really interesting thing about the passenger pigeons is that they lived in such enormous, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the collective noun of
Flocks,
the
flocks.
flocks, such enormous flocks that the possibility is that actually they may have been extinct when they were still alive because they couldn't have that big population anymore. So that they're an excellent example of that. That even once there was like a handful of them left, that was too late for them because they couldn't do the big flocks in which they, was their solid part of the behavior. And as for dire wolves, well, yeah, it's a non-starter. It's just not going to happen. And where would you put it? You need the reserves, you need the preserves to keep them in anyway. And we've already got the priority of trying to preserve the grey wolf. And well, there's also a question mark over whether a red wolf is a thing. But I'm not going to go into that because that gets into quite an arcane taxonomic question. Is the red
Well,
wolf
and
distinct from the grey wolf?
and there's also, places where they're trying to reintroduce grey wolves. There's a lot of
Yeah,
controversy around that, isn't there? Because farmers
yeah.
get quite upset because, I think
Hmm.
places like, is it the Pyrenees and the French Alps, and places where they've started to try to reintroduce wolves,
Hmm.
have caused big kind of social problems as well. So, you know, what are you going to do with a massive dire wolf, like a extra big grey wolf? I mean, who's going to accept that?
I completely agree. And that's the other thing that slightly frustrated me about this and some of the coverage that I came across. So Carl Zimmer did a good write-up of this for the New York Times. He talked, was it him? It might have been, I may be getting confused about who was talking about this. I don't think it was Carl Zimmer actually. One of them swept up these ideas of the companies. They're saying this is big business because Colossal Biosciences are not the only one doing it. They're 10 billion. And they mentioned another company in California that's doing some of this work. But they also mentioned in the same breath another company in Europe that's doing reintroductions. And to me, that seemed completely unfair. Right, this is a company that's specializing in reintroductions. Yes, it's a company, but it's not the same as genetic engineering. Reintroductions is proper conservation bioscience work that requires careful work with landowners, policies, local populations, zoos. It requires a whole load of careful work, and that is good conservation work that works, that has a track record, not this magical tinkering. It seems to be an awful lot of let's press a button and hope it solves our problem situation without actually having to do the hard graft. Oh, I'm getting a bit ranty again. I have to calm down, take a cup of tea. But I think you're so let's return back to what you said at the beginning here, about
What's wrong with them? I think I said.
what's wrong with him. No, at the
Why are
very
they
beginning, I
dire
asked
wolf?
you.
And now we know.
No, not that bit. The bit you said about is de-extinction. I can't remember what you said at the beginning. You said it's not working, it doesn't, and it's not, it's pointless.
Okay.
Now that we've had
and
this
takes
long
money away from
conversation,
conservation.
yeah, and taking money away from conservation, I think now we've maybe explored that and I think come around to that justification as to why that's the case. But given that this is a complete farce. So what is a dire wolf then? I guess is we should maybe draw this to a close. So is 20 edits to 14 genes enough to change a grey wolf to a dire wolf? I think you've clearly demonstrated that is not the case. Or as this quote here from Pontus Skoglund, a geneticist, said, if a chimpanzee had 20 changes in its genome, would it be a human? Because that's the scale of what we're talking about here, right? It's the same sort of genetic relatedness, same sort of time frame of 5 million years ago that this split happens. So maybe we should conclude with this quote that came at this Time magazine article. One of the teams from the Colossal wanted to make sure that they include this quote at the end of this article from Teddy Roosevelt. In the moment of any choice, the first thing to do is the right thing. The next thing to do is the wrong thing. The worst thing to do is nothing at all. Are Colossal Biosciences doing the right thing, the wrong thing, or nothing at all?
That's interesting because it depends in context of what. I would say that in terms of conservation, they're doing nothing at all, because they're not contributing to the conservation of extinct species or nearly extinct species. They're just messing about with genomes of living species and not producing extinct ones.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I might go further than that. I would say they're actually doing active damage. This PR, I mean, it's not the first time that scientists have overblown their results and made a big fanfare. This time it's different because there's billions of pounds involved, not millions, billions, which is a bit of a
which the authors have stock options in, it's worth saying.
With the authors have stock options in. They did declare it, but I mean, it would be hard not to declare it. But it's worse than that because if they were just tinkering around the lab, creating this and seeing, look what we can do with science, which is a very sad thought, but it's actively damaging conservation efforts. That tweet from Doug Burgum, who is a policymaker, who makes decisions about land use, who makes decisions about protected endangered species, indicates to me that the damage that they're doing, the PR isn't just, oh, you've overblown it and you're disrupting the public understanding of science, which is true. It's the fact that you would actually be setting back conservation efforts because people now think, screw it, we can just let things go extinct and we can bring them back later on. In much the same way that Elon Musk and all the tech bros are saying, oh, let's just go to Mars. We can screw up this planet. We can't do neither of those things. Once edited species is gone, it's gone. Under maybe some very, very rare exceptions of very, very recent things. And if the planet is gone, we're gone. That's the thing that is upsetting about this whole affair. But that's me on my high horse now. I need to get down from that high horse and calm down and have a cup of tea.
Well, I think that was an excellent speech and an excellent point. And we should both go and have a cup of tea now.
The Fossil Files was presented by Robert Sansom and Susanna Maidment. You can find more information, including links to the original papers that were discussed, at fossils.libsyn.com, and you can contact us at fossilfiles.pod@gmail.com.